In the news today from Ukraine, many are saying that President Zelensky's decision to replace his top military commander is likely to be an unpopular move and represents a huge gamble. And the outgoing military commander has said that he thinks the war is at a stalemate right now. Let's go to Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine and get more. Joe, good afternoon to you there.
Bob, good afternoon from snowy Kyiv. And yeah, two big news items. Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin last night, which, as I watched it at 1 o'clock in the morning here, it was, for me, it was akin to having a halftime interview during a school shooting. Being able to talk to the perpetrator of horrible war on a free country during the war, pretty shocking. And meanwhile, hours before that, indeed, we had the news that President Zelensky had replaced General Zaluzhny with Oleksandr Syrsky as commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces. And when that news broke, I had spent the past 2 days at a secret conference called the Kyiv International Cyber Resilience Forum. It was 3 stories underground. Because of the threat, whenever people gather, especially to work for victory, you do become a target of the Russians. And in attendance were Ukrainians and foreigners alike, civilians and soldiers. And when the news broke, just as the conference was ending, the change, that Oleksandr Syrsky would be replacing the much beloved General Zaluzhny, I was struck by how calm everyone was. Everyone was, looking at their phones, receiving the news. There were no cries of anger or despair. People were calm and still carrying on with their conversations about, how, there's a lot of IT people and people working on cyber security and cyber resilience, developing technology that could benefit not only Ukraine, but also the world, sort of in this prism of, of an existential fight. And so I was struck by how calm everyone was. And that, when you read the press accounts, you look at Twitter, you would think that, sort of pandemonium here, but that really was not the case. And I think part of it was the way that this announcement was made. 2 weeks ago, when the idea was first sort of floated that Zaluzhny would be dismissed, there was a lot of anger. People had time to sort of think about it. Zaluzhny has been a much beloved figure, but President Zelensky said it was time to make a change, and even in doing so, he still praised Zaluzhny, and it seems that he offered him the position of ambassador from Ukraine to the Court of St. James, to the United Kingdom. It doesn't seem that Zaluzhny will accept that, but one of the contentions is that Zelensky got rid of Zaluzhny because he saw him as a political threat, but actually, now Zaluzhny, as a former commander, would have much more ability to be involved in politics, and even so, Zelensky still wanted to keep him in the orbit of power. And one of the interesting things here, and it's helpful because I had this perspective meeting with some very intelligent people at that cyber resilience conference, people from the UK and the US and all over the world. If you look at on X, on Twitter, I've noticed for a long time there are accounts that seem to be in favor of Ukraine, but I've long not trusted them. There's always something very subtle. They'll on a regular basis they'll praise Ukraine, but then at moments like this, moments of really high level sensitivity, they go against Ukraine and they try to sow discord. And I've seen exactly that with the post today about Oleksandr Syrsky. Ukraine's new commander-in-chief. He was born in Russia. His parents are still in Russia. And to the outside, that might sound ridiculous. But, for me, I've spent a lot of time in eastern and southern Ukraine, in places like Nikopol or Kharkiv or Dnipro, where almost every single person, including Ukrainian heroes and warriors, they have relatives in Russia. This is normal, especially because during Soviet times, there were a lot of deportations. This country was governed by Moscow. And so there are, plenty of people that have strong family connections across the border, including parents. And one of the sad things is a lot of them can't talk to their family in Russia anymore. I mean, they can call them up, but they're so much believing Putin's propaganda So this is not something unusual, and so it's not even a surprise that Ukraine's commander in chief, has parents in Russia, and no matter what they say, that doesn't reflect on who he is. And the new commander, he is widely seen as the architect of the victorious Battle of Kyiv, when early in the full-scale invasion, when Ukrainians repelled the Russians. Which, by the way, in that Tucker Carlson interview with Putin last night, Putin claimed that he benevolently pulled away from Kyiv. No, that was the world saw what happened, and a lot of that was due to General Syrskyi and his troops at that time, and the citizens of Kyiv, keeping the Russians away. And I think we also heard stories that Syrskyi, that he, in fact, the Financial Times, respectable publication, Christopher Miller, longtime observer of Ukraine, and the Financial Times story says that there's questions about General Syrskyi because of his costly defense of Bakhmut, and I just assumed that that's the way we have to talk about Bakhmut. But at the very least, you have to consider the other side of it. Because of the very long battle of Bakhmut, we used to talk about the Wagner Group. When do we talk about the Wagner Group? It's gone. It's decimated. And that happened at the Battle of Bakhmut. And yeah, it was costly for Ukrainians, but it doesn't, you at least have to look at the other side of it. Was it worth the strategic value? And I do think anytime we see that there are fatalities, in war and in fighting, someone gets blamed, but you can't get to victory unless you go through those moments. And so that's just some more of the context of of who General Syrskyi is. When I talk with senior people in the military, not only people from yesterday, but people I know well, they say, okay, this is time for we have to make some changes. The military has to be controlled by civilians. That is what a democracy does. And so there's a calm sense of focus here, and people continue to go about their work.
Joe, what do you think would happen if you requested an interview with Putin?
I wanted request an interview with him. I can't even imagine going to Moscow, and they'd probably poison me the moment I arrived. But it was actually one of the most revealing things about Tucker's meeting with Putin. Well, the first 30 minutes, Tucker seemed quite bored because Putin, he's a dictator. No one tells him when to shut up, not even a former Fox News host. And he just went rambling about what he said was a history of Kyiv. And the Kievan Rus were the ancient people. It was an empire founded around 988, the Christianization of the Kievan Rus. And Putin is claiming this ancient heritage. And it's interesting that Putin's 30 minutes of talking at the beginning of that interview, he said nothing to define what Russia is today. He didn't even speak about Moscow. He spoke about Kyiv. Like, this is my precious, this thing that he so desperately wants. And he could not offer, in those entire 2 hours, a positive definition of what Russia is. And neither did Tucker Carlson press him on it. And by the way, the Rus people came from Sweden. The Finns still refer to Sweden as Rotsi. So if anyone has claim to that title, Rus or Russia, it would be the Swedes. But it's so interesting that, this is how Putin justifies his daily attacks upon Ukraine because of some history from 988. And then the other thing he said, when he didn't mention the fact, but when he was in the KGB, Putin described being in Western Ukraine in the 1980s, and he said there were no signs in Ukrainian. Well, of course not, because it was illegal. There were signs in Hungarian and Russian. And so, the Moscow for so long has tried to erase the idea of Ukraine. That's exactly what Putin was doing yesterday. And the fact is, Ukrainians, they showed it in 2014, but they show it every single day now. They don't want to be part of Russia, and not even for cultural reasons. Like General Syrskyi was born in Russia. So many Russian speakers here. For them, it's about being free. It's about not living in a society where your whole country is determined on the whims of one person. That's in total opposite here in Ukraine. And so all of that was missed. And I think the tricky thing here is that and Putin knows this, and he did this very well yesterday with Tucker. Like, he knows a lot of people are disaffected by those in power in the West and not happy with Brussels or the White House and all of this. And you know what? Ukrainians don't agree with a lot of that stuff either. They don't like bureaucracy. They want to be free. And so that's why Putin erases the idea of Ukraine. But he tries to convince people like Tucker to take their anger and distrust of government that got us into 20 years of war, and to say that he's on their side when exactly he's sort of part of that same machine. And we'll see if Tucker falls prey to that, or maybe we'll have an awakening. But it was so clear to me, Bob, in that interview that that Russia is the epitome of tyranny, and Ukraine, from what I especially saw these past couple of days, the epitome of wild freedom, and everyone else is in the middle, in the spectrum, and we get to decide which way we go, toward freedom or to tyranny.
Well, it would be a much different interview with Putin if you did it, Joseph, but I don't think you'd get out alive, so stay safe, will you?
Do it with a weapon.
We'll talk to you on Monday.
Until Monday. Thanks, Bob.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to